Welcome to the Radical Innovators series powered by Ronstadt. In each episode, we will bring to you bold and insightful conversations with top HR leaders from major global organizations to inspire the talent leaders of tomorrow. Join our journey as we explore how these trailblazers are shaping the future of work, driving innovation, improving the lives of their people, and creating radical shifts in HR and talent strategy. I'm Frank Congiu, EVP of Human Capital Strategy and Executive Partnerships at Ronstadt Enterprise. And in each episode, I sit down with industry leaders who are redefining the world of talent and business. In this episode of Radical Innovators series, we're joined by a transformative force in HR leadership, Nickle LaMoreaux, Chief Human Resources Officer at IBM. With a career that spans over 2 decades at one of the world's most iconic tech companies, Nickle has not only witnessed IBM's evolution, she's been part of it and at the heart of it. From her early days in compensation to leading HR through seismic shifts in AI, talent strategy, and digital transformation, Nickle's journey is a masterclass in risk-taking, reinvention, and resilience. In this episode, we discuss how IBM's enduring culture of innovation continues to shape its workforce strategy. You'll hear how Nickle's team disrupted traditional HR models, the impact of AI on IBM's global HR function, and why personal responsibility, client focus, and trust remain pillars in a constantly evolving corporate landscape. Let's speak to Nickle to gain invaluable insight into how one of the world's oldest tech companies continues to lead by example, and why courage and curiosity are essential qualities for every HR professional navigating the unknown. All right, here with the CHRO of IBM, Nickle. Nickle, great to see you.
Frank, always great to spend time with you.
Really excited that we're able to get this on the books. I know we connected a couple months ago when we saw each other in person at NAHR, and really excited that we're here today now recording.
Absolutely.
So in looking at you're like one of the very few people, if you take a look at your LinkedIn background, after college, you've been with IBM your whole entire career, and that seems to be a rarity these days. If you think about your career, what are some of the things that sort of helped elevate you and accelerate your path to becoming the CHRO of IBM?
Yeah, and I do acknowledge, and maybe this will change. You never know as the workplace and workforce evolves. I do acknowledge my profile is unique. You know, one company for a long time. Some of your listeners may be listening to this saying, "How could that be?" I do think it is the benefit of sometimes being with a large global company because there's lots of opportunity that exists not only in your current location but globally. It's also the benefit of IBM's business model. We're a hardware, software, services company. And so I feel like I've worked in all of those businesses and I've gotten to have that experience as an HR professional without leaving the broader company. And so lots of opportunity has been availed to me during this time. If I think about those some experiences and you know what has transpired for me, even though I didn't acknowledge this at the time, it has been about risk taking. As I think about my career and what has, allowed me to sit in this seat and gain different experiences, I always thought as I moved from role to role in IBM, what was I going to gain as a new experience? So I often went into roles where I wasn't sure if I was going to be successful. My first time I went into compensation, I knew nothing about compensation. And so it was a huge risk, but I was building skills along the way. I also, shortly after joining IBM, I went on international assignment with my relatively new husband and 12-month-old daughter to Shanghai, China. My husband and I didn't even have passports at the time. So to show you kind of what a big risk that was for us to up and move our new family. But those opportunities allowed me to gain new skills, build a network, experience new cultures. And so that has maybe been one of the defining parts of my career.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I admire that risk taking. I can't say that I've done that myself and taking such big risks. I'd also be fearful of being with you in a casino. I might leave with very little money in my pocket.
Even little risks, you might be surprised at what a difference they can make in your career. And I know you've done those risks from a professional point, moving from place to place. Yes.
Yes, and you give me some coaching along the way on that, so I appreciate that. If I think about, you talked about being part of all of the different parts of IBM's business, and you see the red hat behind you. I think about that as an acquisition. A lot of your former colleagues from Kyndryl, some of those who have
Yes.
gone and come back. Um, Really curious about the transformation that IBM's undergone in the last recent years, and then what you think has been some of the drivers and the strength from an organizational perspective, and some of the things you're most proud of in leading in that.
Yeah, look, I know sometimes people use the term when they talk about IBM as old tech. And, I reject everything about that titling, but there is an essence to it underneath, which is, IBM has been around for over 100 years in the technology industry. So, by the very nature of the company, we've had to continually reinvent ourselves decade after decade, not once, not twice.
Yeah.
Most people don't know this, but IBM started out as a company. The international business machines that they were talking about were cheese and meat slicers in your
Really?
deli,
I
right?
didn't know that.
Yes. So, that moved to cash registers and then started to move into the world of computing, but now sit where we are today, where most of our business is software and professional services, a consulting firm. So it's a very different place. So being in a company like that, where total reinvention, transformation, continuous evolution is just part of the DNA, spills over not just from the business model, but it also spills over into how individuals approach their career
Yeah.
and into the talent model. And that's what I get the privilege of kind of thinking about now as I sit in this seat of how does that transformation in the business lead to transformation in our talent strategies. So that's the really exciting thing I think about where we are now.
With all that transformation, all that change, how has the culture transformed through that process? And what have been some of the key drivers behind continuing to keep a strong culture as you've shed parts of the business and you've brought in new businesses?
Yeah, and this is the other thing that, again, I think a lot of companies, once you might move out of the startup phase and you graduate to kind of the next phase, and then those of us that are, kind of longer experienced, longer tenured companies, one of the things you always struggle with in transformation is, what do you hold on to from the past, if
Hmm.
anything, and what do you move to in the future? And if you hold on to the past and too much of the past for too long, you kind of lose relevancy. That being said, do you really need to shed everything? Or are there some things that are core to your foundation that you need to keep? And this is exactly how I think about our culture transformation. There are some things that are core to IBM's culture that were true in the 1920s
Yeah.
and are true in 2025. And the three kind of pillars that we talk about are, innovation. We are an innovation company. So it doesn't matter if we were innovating on cheese slicers and cash registers, or if we're innovating now today on AI and quantum. Innovation is a core piece of our culture. The second piece is client focus, client success. We are an enterprise company. We are a business to business company. So our clients are other large enterprises. We serve them, and always having them at the center of the innovation that we're doing, our service delivery models. So this client centricity is a big piece of it. And then the third thing, and it's actually one of IBM's values, which is personal responsibility and trust in all relationships. And so this underlying of how we interact with each other, integrity, inclusion,
Yeah.
responsibility, are really, really core to who we are. So we've held on to those. But there are things we're changing about our culture. If you haven't read The Geek Way by Andrew McAfee, I certainly recommend it to listeners here. But there are changes we're making in our culture around speed and openness, ownership, science, that we've got to infuse so that we can work more quickly. that we can keep pace with some of the innovation that's happening. As we get bigger and bigger as an organization, we need people to have autonomy. And how do they do that? And so that everything doesn't have to come up to headquarters and then back down. So that's how we're thinking about culture always. What existed in the past that still needs to be true? But what are the adjustments we need to make as we go
Yeah.
forward? And that's how we're thinking about it now.
Two things struck me on that because I think to your point about constantly to reinvent and then think about how do you keep what was great, but also sort of shed some of the things that maybe weren't so great. I had the honor to lead a lot of transformation projects with GE, and everybody kind of knows the story of being 14 separate companies under the umbrella of one. And then what that looked like. And as each company spun off, they thought, well, we want to retain so much of the great of GE, but there's a lot of things that we might want to shed. And so
Yeah.
working through each one of those businesses as they did that was an interesting and fun experience. And on the geek way, my friend Rita McGrath recently connected me with Andrew, and so Andrew's not only going to be, I think, on our podcast, but we're going to be doing a dinner together. So hopefully you'll be able to join that.
Absolutely. And again, I really, the principles, they seem so simple and some of the insights he makes, but the way he weaves them together and connects them to high performing companies, it's really worth a read, regardless of what industry you're in.
So a little bit about, I mean, we've talked about what this has looked like as from an IBM transformation and why you've needed to do this. Curious about what this has looked like specifically for you and within the HR organization.
Yeah. Yeah, so we don't get a pass in HR. If the business is
Okay.
required to change and evolve all the time, that's also an expectation for us. And it's got two pieces to it. So obviously, as the business evolves, we have to think differently about programs. Do we approach talent acquisition in a different way, given what the business needs are, learning, reskilling, compensation? So some of this is directly in partnership with the business, but also some of this is us thinking about what type of HR department do we
Hmm.
want to be? How do we want to add value? How do we make changes before we're asked to make changes so that we can provide higher value service? And that has been the part of the journey here that my predecessor, Diane Garrison, started with us. Really, this idea of how do we disrupt ourselves as HR before we have to, and has now really, almost 10 years later, taken us to a very different place where that disruption within HR is happening organically. It's not coming out of my office all the time. It's happening
Right.
bottoms up in the organization. And I think we're going to talk through some of the specific examples of what we've done.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. So I was be curious about some of the examples, and then also what are the metrics in terms of how you guys are looking at, because some of this is probably early on, and so there's different indicators of is this tracking to ultimately what you wanted it to be, and then maybe some of this is more late stage, and I think this is where IBM has always been so far ahead of organizations, particularly as it relates to, I think about your skills-based approach and other pieces of even just being such a forefront leader in AI. So would love to hear some of the specific examples, and then of course the way you're measuring that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we started our journey to become kind of a digital enabled HR function back in 2017. So, like I said, we've been on this journey for
Yeah.
quite some time. At that time, we launched our first chatbot, Ask HR. In the beginning, our vision on this was very simple. Can it be a Q&A, an answer bot for employees and managers? But I will tell you, about a year later, when the HR organization at IBM was facing some challenges. We were facing budget cuts.
Mm.
We were facing increased employee expectations around better experiences, where we were facing complexity in the compliance environment around the world and states within the US. We quickly pivoted and said, we're going to actually have this AI chatbot assistant be the front face to almost 21,000 first line managers. And so it was a pretty bold decision at the time. And it was really to kind of help drive some efficiency and
Yeah.
productivity. But if you ask me where we are now, we are far down this path. I would say that we are a fully, digital enabled HR function, and most managers, employees, even executives use AI as their primary entry point into HR. Last year, our AI agent, it's now an agent, not just a chatbot or an assistant. It's doing questions and answers and transactions. But last year, our AI agent had 11, almost 12 million interactions with
Wow.
employees and managers. And so volume is one way, are people using it? Are they adopting it? But some of the other metrics I'm looking at to say, well, is it quality? Is it valuable? We had a CSAT of 74%. Now, to give you some idea, before we were AI enabled, we had a CSAT closer to 20%.
Yeah.
So, why are we seeing kind of a greater promoter score around this? It's really due to the fact that managers are getting answers faster. They are customized because of the AI capability. But when they do need an HR professional, they're also able to get to that individual faster. And I can talk a little bit more how we've done that. But for us, this idea of volume, satisfaction, quality of answers, and even this point of efficiency. So our Ask HR agent has a 94% containment rate, meaning of the inquiries coming in, it's not a great user experience if you're just going into a digital agent and it's just routing you somewhere else. But it is taking care of 94% of everything coming in. So those are some of the metrics we're using to really understand whether or not we're having the impact we want.
Yeah, I love it. So, I mean, I think obviously the name of the podcast being Radical Innovators for a reason, and I think IBM as an organization has always done that. And this is an example of being able to make employees' lives easier by getting what they need and not having to wait and get rerouted and so on and go through several conversations and trade emails back and forth with their HR manager. So this is, I'm sure, just one of many examples.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think it leads to, when we think about AI, a lot of people are saying, well, what are the pieces of HR that are going to be most transformed? Is it going to be talent acquisition? Is it going to be your COEs and employee support centers? And I think, Frank, you and I are similar minds of this. I think AI is going to have a tremendous impact on all areas of HR. I don't think there's an area of HR that I would say isn't going to be enhanced or enabled in some way. But maybe one of the areas that people don't think about enough is this idea of the HR partner, the HR generalist, the BU HR leader, the client HR leader, whatever you call them. I think most organizations, and IBM is no different, when we made this change to really trying to have AI be the front door to us, one of the data points that caused us to make this change was some of the dissatisfaction that was sitting in our HR partner, our HR generalist community.
Hmm.
They felt overworked, they
Yeah.
felt undervalued, they didn't feel like they could service their managers in all the real time ways at the high quality they wanted. And some of that was because we did a work study of, well, what were they actually spending their time on? And what we uncovered that 65% of our HR generalists, our HR partners, spent their time, 65% of their time, doing transactional work.
Yeah.
Where's the link to open enrollment? What's the vacation policy? When is the compensation plan due? It was very transactional. My employee doesn't know how to add a dependent to their benefits. It was very, very transactional. And so, what we were trying to do with AI, and I think some of the opportunity that sits out there for a lot of organizations, is how can you route that to an AI assistant so that the HR partner now is freed up to do all of the work that we want them to do?
Yeah.
Coaching managers and leaders, strategic workforce planning, really that hands on attention. role playing, on having difficult conversations. I think that for us was one of the big unlocks and one of the jobs that got disrupted that we weren't necessarily thinking about, but is now having tremendous impact in the organization.
I think I shared with you a lot of the work that we did with the TED conference last year was exactly around this, was how can you sort of deconstruct roles and pixelate roles and then rebuild them with AI for this exact reason. And one of the examples that we worked very closely on was with nurses. Nurses spend on an average 50% of their time on administrative duties, and there's this insanely high rate of nurse burnout. There's a nurse shortage. So what could we do to take this role and pick it apart with AI so that they're able to turn on and be 80% or 90% focused on nursing, what they love and want to do, and what we have a shortage in.
Exactly. And look, that's exactly the same use case here. And again, even as HR professionals are helping the other roles in their organization, whether it be nurses if you're in the healthcare industry or traders if you're in financial services, thinking through, I think organizations get a little surprised at how much of that administrative
Yeah.
task exist, or even what we sometimes call job friction exist, that isn't core to the mission of what you really want the role doing.
What it feels like organizations have struggled with is as people get more time back, what do you
Mm.
do with that? Do you help find ways to make them better coaches, to your point, or are you helping enable it? Or right now, or like, has IBM cracked the code on this? Or are you just saying like, let's figure out how to make sure people are happier in their roles as a result of shedding some of this? Or are you getting more productivity? Just curious what that looks like.
Yeah, look, I think the answer is yes to all of the above.
Yeah.
I do think it helps you get more productivity, which can be a great thing. And certainly in places around the world where there are skill shortages and labor shortages, rather than just asking your existing team to work harder and longer, those productivity gains can be tremendous. But this idea of also this higher quality work, for many of our HR partners, as you take away that administrative tasks, we've really spent a lot of time on training them on coaching.
Yeah.
As an example, in an old world, if you had asked an HR professional where they were, covering a lot of managers and really trying to answer all these transactional questions, if you had come to me and said, Nickle, I have a low performer, a very typical answer back from an HR professional would have been, well, Frank, here's what you need to document. Here's how you put together a low performance plan. Let me know how it goes and if you need anything else. It would have been that transactional. Today, that HR partner, because they have freed up time, can say, hey, Frank, we could go down a performance improvement plan, but have you availed yourself to all the education and resources that are available for their job role? Have we tried some training? Have we tried some other interventions? Is there a mentor, a team lead you could partner with them? And even if we end up in the process of a performance improvement plan, if you say to me, Nickle, I've tried all of that. This is really, I'm to a point of what do I need to document? I can give you that process information, but then I might be able to say to you, hey, Frank, do you want to role play how to have this conversation with your employee?
Yeah.
Let's practice. And that quality interaction of just making sure that you're not jumping into the process. Have we really evaluated? Are the person in the wrong job? Are there learning opportunities? But even as you get into a specific answer, how can I help you along in role playing coach? That's a totally different quality transaction that you're adding to the organization, that's not only helping the manager, but it's helping the employee.
Yeah. And this goes into the, I mean, if I think about, we hosted a breakfast together a year ago at the Time Inc. building and with a bunch of CHROs, and I hear where you were then and where you are now. So it's interesting to see that this has grown a lot. Number one, from a capability standpoint, but also just thinking about some of the, I was looking at my notes here in terms of some of the, at that time you were talking about what the proper balance would be between automation and the human, right? So what extent the HR team member still stays key to different parts of their role and their process, and then how are they going to become more impactful? It sounds like you're moving the needle a lot on that since we talked about this a year ago.
Absolutely. And look, I think this is an important decision for every organization, every HR professional CHRO to make. Look, there are a lot of amazing use cases out there on AI. And I think sometimes as a profession, we get FOMO. And
Mhm.
so we hear about this company using this use case. And so we immediately think we need to go use that use case. And we go do it's, I think this is really important that you take a step back. I think every HR team should be thinking about how they use AI. And if you're not deep into your delivery model on this, you're probably following behind. But the where explicitly or the what is very company dependent. You know, for talent acquisition, we are being very, very cautious about where we use AI.
Hmm.
And that's a use case that many other companies are running ahead full speed. It might be their primary use case. We aren't. We do use AI in compensation. And that's a place where many companies would never go. So I just give this advice to everybody, which is don't worry about necessarily what others are doing in this space. Think about, the culture of your company, the talent objectives of your company, the business results you're trying to give, and make sure that your AI use cases line up behind that.
This is great. I just want to shift gears for a second, though, because I think many of the people that are tuning in to hear from you are going to think about, um, how do you, number one, how's the HR role progressing, changing, and transforming, particularly in the coming years? And you, I think, have a great lens into this, not only as a CHRO, but as a CHRO of a company that's a leader in AI and all these spaces.
Mhm.
Just curious what you see as in terms of the evolving role, especially from a tech-driven organization like IBM.
Yeah, so I will tell you as I think about the evolving role as a CHRO, an HR leader in any of the functions, I do think this ability to have a little bit of a technical skill set is becoming more and more important. Now,
Mhm.
before I scare anybody off on this, I'm not saying that you have to go do your own coding on the, but what I am saying is you need to have an understanding of the technology, how it might be able to be applied, and you need to stay really up to speed on the evolving nature of it. So, not only just understanding the tech as it is today, but a curiosity about where it may be going.
How do you guys encourage people to do that, though? I mean, because I hear this all the time, which organizations are struggling. We make all these tools available, but the AI use and adoption is incredibly low.
Yeah. And look, I think that the AI use and adoption being low is for a couple different reasons. One, it can just be overload. Some
Mm.
of the companies that I talk to, when you say to them, well, what AI tools are you using? After 20, you just say to them, okay, can you stop for a moment?
Right.
Right. And so some of it can be tool overload. So I do think one of the things a CHRO has to do is partner with the business leaders, the CIO, to say, how can you make a very simple entry point? For us, our AI interface is Ask HR. We do not have anything else. So there aren't all these bespoke tools
Yeah.
underneath, and we're bringing them into one place. So tool overload can be one reason why there isn't high adoption. The second one can be you've applied it to a use case that doesn't matter. And I think that's something to really think deeply about. If it's a use case that matters, people will be driven to it. They will want to use it. So really think about this. And it goes back to what you and I were talking about before, Frank, which is you don't have to do every AI use case out there. Which is the use case that's going to matter for your business? And then I think there's a third piece, which is a little bit around organizational change management. If I go back to 2017, when we first launched our Ask HR chatbot, for a 2017 chatbot, it was pretty good. No one used it. Well, why did no one use it? Because why would they use that chatbot when they could walk down the hall and ask me a question, or they could email HR, or they could call a telephone number and get an HR professional? They didn't need it.
Yeah.
So, one of the big first lessons we learned in AI is if you want to drive adoption and you're really confident in that tool, you shut down all other barriers. Overnight, we shut down the email address to HR, the telephone number to HR, and we said, this is your funnel to go through. And so, again, I know it's a very tops down way to do it, but you have to force behavior change sometimes too to drive some of this adoption.
That's the key piece there, right? Forcing it, because I can only imagine there was probably a little bit of anxiety in that pivot, wanting to go back to old habits of just emailing someone or picking up the phone.
Absolutely. But anyway, just going back to your original question, this idea of having some technology acumen. And look, I know people say, well, Nickle, that's easy for you to say as you sit in IBM. I have zero educational background in technology. I am not somebody who would naturally, you would think, oh, understands this. It is about just self-educating. It is about, talking to people in the network, but really spending time because this is not going away. But I think it's a critical success factor.
What advice would you give for HR leaders that are up and coming, in terms of some of the, I think you talked a little bit about the mindsets, but some of the things you'd say, like, hey, well, net new that you haven't already shared?
Obviously, what I would say is risk taking. And maybe what I would say is, especially for those that are very ambitious, your career is a marathon, not a sprint, right?
Yeah.
As the saying goes. And so taking jobs based on skills you're gaining versus status or will I be excellent at it, or promotions, in the long run of your career, you will be better served by taking some of those lateral moves, maybe even detours, because of what you're able to really learn and grow from. And because nobody can predict the future, especially in this environment, having that acquisition of skills, I think, is really important. The other point I would say is that be an HR professional that is really focused on driving outcomes. And I think that's how many, many HR professionals distinguish themselves. Yes, you have to know compliance and you have to know process and you have to be able to scale, but make sure you're not doing HR for the sake of HR, but
Yeah.
that you're actually doing it in service of a business. And so this also gets at this business acumen component that I know we've all heard time and time again that the best CHROs, the best HR professionals, are business people that happen to specialize in HR. And I can't overemphasize that enough.
I think this came up in a recent conversation with Lucian, CHRO of Prudential, and we talked about some of the great people that fit that model. And I think he talked about Matt from Apollo and mentioned Donna from
Yeah.
IBM and or sorry, from Walmart. And we talked about you, of course. But curious if there's any other people like Peter Fasolo, some of the other names other people should look up and follow.
Yeah, so look, I think Monique Harina from American Express has an amazing approach to not only HR in service of the business, but she calls her team not the HR team, but the colleague experience team.
Yeah.
And so she has a really interesting perspective on that. I also think, Stephanie Kramer, somebody at L'Oreal who's very, very deep in the business and how they actually make money. Jackie Canny at ServiceNow. I often say, Jackie should actually be the sales leader in a different world because she is so deep on what their business does and how they add value for the client. So I think those are just some other examples I would name.
It just so happens that Stephanie and I are on next week to record a podcast, and Jackie the following week. So
Perfect.
at least we're on the right path.
Yes.
All right, this one wasn't planned.
It's okay.
Is Duke going to win it all this year?
Oh, you went back in my profile. I really hope so. I will tell you, my husband is a graduate of UNC Chapel Hill, so we are a little bit of a house divided. And we've had some down years at Duke, but I'm really hoping, with Flag as the freshman, that we'll be able to pull it off.
My wife went to Duke, and her sister as well. So they've got a massive rooting interest, and we'll be rooting together against your husband. Which way do the kids sway? Which side?
Unfortunately, they have all followed him. I don't know
Yeah,
what I have done wrong.
yeah, it's tricky. Well, as long as my daughters stay 49ers fans, they'll be on my good side.
I love it. I love it.
Nickle, thank you so much for spending time with me today.
It was a wonderful conversation. Thank you, Frank.
All right, take care. That wraps up another episode of the Radical Innovators series. A huge thank you to Nickle LaMoreaux for joining us and sharing such rich insight into how IBM is not just adapting their workforce strategy to change, but truly leading it. From embracing AI to elevate HR service delivery, to shifting the role of HR business partners from transactional support to strategic coaching, Nickle reminded us that transformation isn't just about technology. It's about a mindset, risk-taking, and purpose. Some of my key takeaways: disrupt yourself before you're disrupted, a powerful call for HR teams to evolve proactively. Lead with culture but adapt with intention, retaining core values while evolving with speed and openness. And perhaps most importantly, that AI adoption is only as good as the use case behind it. Clarity of purpose trumps quantity of tools. If you enjoyed this conversation, you're going to love our next episode. I'll be sitting down with Stephanie Kramer, the CHRO of L'Oreal, who brings a unique perspective on talent, brand, and experience in one of the world's most iconic consumer businesses. Stephanie's approach to HR is as bold and innovative as the company she represents, and trust me, you won't want to miss it. Thanks for tuning in to the Radical Innovators series. Be sure to subscribe, share, and join us next time as we continue to explore the future of work through the lens of those redefining it. Until then, stay curious, stay bold, and keep innovating.
Human Forward. Randstad.